we can have that discernment that it is in fact our choice, as opposed to what does society say I should want? What does my partner think I want? What do my parents think I should have? Because in your 20s, we're influenced by that so much. Never mind all the social media and what we should be wanting. Now we can stand in our own power.
Electricast. Welcome to Season 4 of Transforming 45. I'm your host, Lisa Boat, and this season we're stepping fully into our power. The heat, the hormones, the heartbreak, the healing. This is Midlife, raw and redefined. Each episode, you'll hear stories of humans who are rewriting the rules, reclaiming their bodies, their desires, their voices. This is where we stop shrinking, start shining, and remember who the hell we are. Because midlife isn't a crisis, it's an awakening. Let's get transforming 45. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I have been looking forward to this conversation. So I'm really happy to welcome the brilliant and deeply grounded Farah Jamani, mom, pharmacist, national board certified health, wellness, and mindset coach, and founder of ResetRx, who is unapologetically reshaping the future of women's. What a time to be having this conversation. It is more important than ever. Welcome to the show, Farah. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's such a pleasure.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Who are you and how did life introduce you to this version?
I think it starts as a kid when my favorite question was always why? Why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? And it was that insatiable curiosity that led me into healthcare and becoming a pharmacist. As I was a pharmacist, I was starting to climb up the ranks into senior level management. But at that point, I didn't understand how my body was communicating with me. So though I was super successful, I was managing hundreds of indirect reports and direct reports, multi-million dollars, 20 plus stores. I was coming home every afternoon and crashing out and having a nap and hoping no one was going to find out. At that point, I was unable to eat most things. My stomach was such a disaster. I didn't know what sat well, what didn't. I just found it easier not to eat. My eczema was out of control. I had no energy. I was always the tired one. And at that point in my late 20s and early 30s, I should have been at the top of my game, both in my health, in my profession. But there was this quiet shame that I kept carrying, wondering, what was I doing wrong? Maybe this is just the way I am. It was at that point where I started to seek out some answers. I started to delve more into the root cause of functional medicine. Of course, I turned to conventional medicine first, being a pharmacist, but it didn't hold the answers that I needed. So I needed to do something deeper. I started to look at root cause of what was going on. I started to work with people like naturopaths. And though I got a little bit better, my energy started to improve somewhat. There was always this missing piece. And it wasn't until I went through a major loss in my life where I hit what I consider my rock bottom. And I think that's different from everyone. And your rock bottom is where you choose to make a choice. And it was at that point when I had two small kids, I wasn't able to get off the couch. And I heard my daughter say to my son, they were quite little at the time, listen, mommy's too tired for us. I'm going to have to put you to bed. And as a mom, that just drives a knife into your heart that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was now affecting the next generation of my kids. So I went on this quest to try to figure out, why was I so burnt out all the time? Why couldn't I have any resilience and capacity in my life? Why was my body starting to fail and then start to attack me? And in this journey, I found functional medicine. I found root cause approaches to balancing your body. But what I found at the crux of all of this was how your nervous system plays such a role in creating health in your body. When you are constantly stuck on, driving like your hair is on fire, your body can only take it for a certain amount of time. And then like a car, you're pulled over on the side of the road with the hood up. And that's where I was. So it took a number of years to unwind that and start to repattern. I went back to the literature, created my own protocols and supports of how I do that. And now that's where I am today. And now I'm in such a privileged position where I can bridge the conventional side of medicine with this more integrated approach so women in their 40s and beyond don't have to feel like I was. They can feel that resilience.
Thank you for sharing that story. And there's so much there are so many threads that we need to go back and pull. And the first one that I want to go to is really at the heart of it is identity, right? that those of us who grew up in this specific time, who are told you can do it all and you can do it all really well, that is the cornerstone of our identity. I have to have a successful career. I have to have a great relationship. I have to be the perfect mom, and and everything has to look great while doing it. And so many of us, like, this is the pattern of the story that I hear. Like, I was trying to do all of these things and live up to all of these expectations, and then my body said no. How did you start to unravel this cornerstone of identity, right? That it's not actually in what we do, but in who we are. And I think that that is a real challenge when everything in our society, in our North American culture, is all wrapped up in value is what you do.
And that is a huge question, and one that I will work through with a lot of women is, how do you define success? What is your metric? Is it the money, the status, the influence? Is it how you feel in your body? How do both of those two things intersect? Oftentimes women will build, and just because we can doesn't mean we should. But we start to create what ends up being this house of cards that through midlife, you start to have declining hormones, your house of cards starts to collapse. And you are left holding the cards wondering, how did this all happen? But if you can start to look back and in retrospect, you can see those subtle shifts and signs that your body's giving you, that your heart's giving you, that your mind is giving you. But we need women not to be looking in retrospect. We need them starting to look forward and saying, what is success? What do I want in all of this? Is this actually important to me? Or is this the conditioning and stories and patternings that I grew up hearing? And these voices are not even my own. So a lot of my repatterning did involve a lot of that, of what is important to me, especially in this season of my life. Raising small children, being in midlife, and then the next chapter is, what do I want that to look like? And realize that's within my own control. Now that my health is stable as a foundation, now I have options and choices. Whereas in my 30s, I didn't have a lot of options.
Feeling spicy today for lots of reasons. Part of it just is this world that we're living in right now is bringing up all of these concepts that we were talking about in really intense ways. It is all being brought to the surface, and the open-hearted person in me says it's always darkest before the dawn, and you have to turn over the rock and see the creepy crawlies. They will continue to be there in the dark. You have to turn it over and let the light be on it. And the human of me who is on the planet in this moment is having like a real rage response to all of this. So there's like that greater context, and it brings up, the things that you were talking about when you were a woman in leadership, what you experienced from men, from women, from all of us who have been conditioned to believe that leadership looks like pushing ourselves and grinding ourselves into the dust. And so one of the precipitating factors to this was I had been booked to do a keynote for a women's retreat, and then the contact wrote back and said, some of our younger participants aren't really sure that they want to learn about menopause. And so they think maybe we should get a different keynote speaker. What would you say to that? And so I wrote a response, but it lit up in me this like deep rage of why would these women not want to participate in this? But it all came back to that. Like that rage pretty quickly turned to empathy. And the question I want to pose to people who are in that space is, ask yourself why. Why don't you want to learn about that? And be really honest with yourself. Because if you're honest with yourself, and there will be different responses, but my inkling is, and I'd be interesting to hear from your perspective from the women that you work with, is that this, again, challenges identity when we have been taught that we are valuable for what our bodies look like and what they can do. And now that's changing. And so I'm interested in what your experience has been.
It's even interesting using the phrase midlife, because though we are there, do we feel we are there? What does that phrase, what is that connotation about being in midlife? To your point, our value is looking a certain way, producing in a certain way, having success in a certain way. And when you're in your 30s, midlife, menopause seems so far off. It seems old. But when we can really bring it down to these are transitions that we're going through, and if we can take the labels off, it is how do we start to stand in our power? How do we start to be able to use our voice? How do we start to trust ourselves in those rooms, believe that we have a seat at the table and we deserve to be at that table, and then have others around us start to share in this common thought process and commonality that we're all having this experience of women in this society. I think for those younger women, it's interesting working with a wide breadth of women from 30s and up. It is the 30-year-olds. Like when I was 30, I was hustling and grinding and I was just trying to make my stake my place in this world. They're really coming in with a lot more balance. They want balance. They don't want to do it the way that we did it. And they're very open to that. Whereas 45, 50, same generation as us, it's a lot of unwinding of you don't have to do it this way. And in
Uh-huh.
fact, it's making your life and your experience in your body and this menopausal transition so much harder when you continue to push on a system that has nothing to give.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really important discussion point, especially when we're talking about allyship between generations in women. Because then there becomes this push, right? Even within our community. Because when you have younger women coming in and saying, we don't want to do it the way you did, it lights up, right? So I want to talk about nervous system in this case because it lights up your nervous system, right? Because then we're feeling all kinds of things. Right. That really likely are rooted in like shame and fear, but
Yeah, 100%.
yeah, but come up like anger and resistance. So there's that happening. And then at the same time, we're also facing what we experience from men as we get to this stage as well, because we often are in leadership positions and we are more likely to use our voices. So we're getting this like pushback from all different areas, which can feel very isolating, which really lights up our nervous system. So first, how do you work with women to help them understand what's happening in their bodies and to tune into the signs from the nervous system? Let's start there.
So, where I start with women is very different than perhaps you expect. I start with the physical side of health first. I think you cannot even begin to look at your nervous system, begin to tackle some of those mental and emotional patterns that have kept you stuck, even consider identity when you're so dysregulated and inflamed in your body and consequently in your brain. So, through the ResetRx, through this 12-week program and beyond that I work with women, we start with the physical side of health. We must start to regulate out your metabolic systems. We've got to regulate out your sleep, your digestion. What are you eating? Let's get this inflammatory bucket lower. I think of inflammation or stressors as internal stressors, what's happening inside your body, and then the external stressors of life. If you don't have enough resilience and capacity in your physical body, you can't handle all of life's external stressors. Once that feels more regulated, you have more capacity to handle life, then we can start to look at some of those mental and emotional patterns, and the nervous system becomes really important there. Most women have no idea how their nervous system gives them signals and how it shows up somatically in their body. So that's a lot of what I work through and teach is how is this emotion showing up? What are the stories that you're starting to make about this emotion? If we can see emotion just as sensations and communication from your nervous system, how do we start to map where you are day to day? How do you start to build in routines and rhythms that support you being able to be more regulated in more conversation? And therefore, how do we start to release some of that neural patterning that's existed probably since you were a child? Because now you're moving into this new frame of life. Your hormones are starting to change. You don't have the same level of resilience and capacity, which is such a gift in a way, because now we can start to choose. Now we can start to choose, do we want to continue that same pathway that we always have? That's brought us success. That's brought us connection to people, brought us relationships, but that has a cost to our body. Or do we want this new way forward? But teaching women to trust that success can come without the hustle is part of our working together. It doesn't always have to be pushing and grinding.
Yeah, that's a really big unwind. When you were talking about recognizing the body first, And that until we do that, we can't even really recognize the emotional components. It made I had an aha moment because there's an activity that I generally do when I'm facilitating a session where I have women draw the outline of their body. And on the inside, they talk about all of the internal things that are challenging. And then around the outside are like all of the life context things. And what I've noticed in session over session is that women can do a really good job of highlighting what's changing internally, like all the physical things. They really struggle to talk about what the life context things are. And I've had lots of wonderings about why that is. Like the physical sometimes is just easier to talk about because it's the facts, right? Like I feel this, I notice this is the data. But when we're talking about life context shifts, it can be a lot more challenging because one, maybe it's painful, maybe you think it's in your head, maybe like there's all of these things. But when you said, until we really recognize what's happening with the body, it's really challenging to recognize everything else. A bunch of pieces fell into place. So thank you for that. That is very helpful.
Also find that because women feel they should be able to take it all on from their life context, when they start to see things start to shift, they don't make the connection that this is my life context or these are my hormones shifting. They make it mean something about themselves. I'm not capable. There is some degree of guilt or shame or other pieces that start to show up in this narrative that they start to tell themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is. I think it's very challenging to face all of these things that are shifting. So it goes back to what you were saying about the grind, right? When we have been conditioned that everything we do, again, it goes back to that doing. And then this time happens and we start to transition into it is a different stage, and it can be really hard to acknowledge because for so long it's been striving toward first education, perhaps relationship, career, maybe children, maybe not, but this like striving for something. And then we hit this phase and there's this change that starts to happen where you see the people who are striving. I had this conversation with my teenagers because um, it was in June, and my youngest son said, "Mom, it feels so weird to see the kids younger than me, like doing the things that I did, like going to prom and going to graduation." And I was like, "Welcome to the rest of your life. This is what it's like watching people younger than you do the things you already did." And that has a real impact on your identity. Again, going back to that identity piece. And so, how do you help people start to detach from that hustle and grind? And
What you're bringing up is this idea of there is a level of life stage, but there's a level of grief that we don't tend to talk about in this stage. And it's the grief of exiting our fertility years, the grief of perhaps being in a sandwich generation and having to manage both ends of it. And perhaps there has been loss in your life. But there's also that grief of when you think of, that pushing and striving is climbing the mountain, we're on this sort of honestly, we're on the kind of back end of that mountain. And that grief of what does that start to bring up? When you start to look at those others, whether it's our daughters, our sisters, whatever, starting to come up behind us, and even the next generation of doing it differently, it does bring up a lot of grief of, I could have done it differently. It didn't have to be so hard. I could have enjoyed my life along the way. And so holding space for both things to be true. There can be the grief and sadness of what is coming. Just like as a child is exiting out of elementary school and going into high school, there is that grief and change. Any transition brings that up, but it's also holding true of what is in the future and what are you choosing to be in the future. Because I think all of our life, you can have the same circumstance. It can feel really amazing. It can feel really bad. And it is, at the end of the day, how are you choosing to look at that situation? And so when we think of transitioning into the midlife or into menopause, whatnot, it is, what do we actively want out of this? Yes, yes, of course, it's our identity. And there's even grief in that because for you, your kids are off at university. And so there is that level of there's a new word for empty nesting. I don't even remember what it's called. It's like the birds come home. There is that. I'm still in the stage of having small children, but I know that those sweet moments are fleeting and changes
Uh-huh.
in your body, changes in your mental status, changes in your friendship circles. All of this change just stirs up so much, yes, identity, but also a lot of grief that we don't make room for in our society. We are such a phobic society talking about grief.
Yes, we are. Yeah. And how do you see that showing itself in women's bodies?
That is a lot of I'll use the word trauma. That is a lot of the trauma that shows up in our bodies. And so most of the women who I see are highly ambitious, very successful, very type A. And yet they're coming to me saying, my thyroid's really off. My gut's really off. And these are those subtle ways where those emotions that we haven't dealt with get lodged into our system. And so, yes, we start with the physiology first, but then it's, what are some of those stories, patterns, traumas that we haven't started to really think of? And I see it in the vein of what are those patterns that are keeping you stuck? Is it people pleasing? Is it perfectionistic thinking? Is it this all or nothing piece? Is it trying to show up in a way that is not in alignment with who you truly are? And how do we start to then see the truth? So I pull in a lot of theory from IFS, so internal family
Mhm.
systems of working with parts.
Yeah.
And looking at different parts of you, we don't always need to have a certain part driving the bus. That part can go sit in the back seat. Who do we want driving that bus? Can we start to bring a more compassionate and curious and calm side of you, part of you, start to come in instead of the hustle and grind, the perfection, the people pleasing part? It's a process. It is such a process. But when you go through the process, it's such a gift for you. It's a gift for your family. It's like throwing this rock in the pond and having that ripple. And it's not just, I feel better and I have energy and I'm losing weight and the lights are back on. This is no, I'm setting the tone to regulate the rest of my community. And so I think when women do this for themselves, they start to rise. And then everyone else can rise around them.
Yeah. I think there's two really important things that you highlighted here. One, process, and two, that we exist in community. So the changes that we make for ourselves impact that community. And I want to dig into process because this is one of the places where I struggle with what is happening in the menopause community in particular, but it's not an uncommon theme throughout the rest of life, right? So the way I describe it is conquering the body, right? Constantly thinking about what is wrong and trying to find the one thing that will fix it. And it's the fix mentality, right? So hormone therapy is an important part of the conversation when we're in the menopause world. And I feel like it is sucking all the air out of the room right now, and that it is the only conversation. And it's giving this sense of, well, if I just start hormone therapy, that's the fix. Like I actually had someone say to me the other day, I guess hormone therapy just doesn't fix everything. And I said, right, it's part of a process. It is not a fix. And so how do you help women get comfortable with the idea of process? And knowing that this is not, we're not trying to fix. We're not cars where we're trying to replace parts.
I think that mindset shift alone is a huge part of what I do. We live in a society where we want quick answers, we want quick fixes, we want an Amazon type life where if we wanted it, we get it the same day or we get it in 24 hours. That whole paradigm shift of there is nothing to be fixed. We are perfect as we are. When we can then step back, because when they're like, well, no, I'm not because I'm having all these list of ailments happening. Okay, this is not a fix. This is your body really wants to be in balance and in health. What is going on that's creating friction that is not allowing that to happen? So when we can think of it as a terrain, so think of a garden. You're not going to grow flowers in a garden if it's full of weeds, it doesn't have great nutrition, you don't give it any water, and there's no daylight. So, similarly to our body as the garden, what is there that friction? Where is that imbalance? What is the terrain that's going on that is allowing these symptoms to happen? And when we can use symptoms as signals, we can start to get really clear. But when we're dysregulated from a nervous system, a metabolism, our mindset, like everything is just so muddy, it's really hard to hear those symptoms first. And so that's where we start with that physical body, getting the inflammation down. So now you can start to hear those signals. But to your point of process, part of it is a managing of expectations,
Mm.
right? When I was in community pharmacy or even not, it's what's that next supplement? What's that drug that's going to fix it? And sure, we can band aid it. We can definitely get you feeling well. And sometimes there is a place for that. I think of it
Mhm.
as a bridge. You need to feel relief. You need to feel well. But if we don't deal with the foundations, if we go to pull away that bridge, you have nothing to stand on. So both things can be true. You can use supplements, medicines, whatnot as a relief, but we do need to start to work on those foundations. And they're simple. I mean, they're simple, they're easy, but they're not simple. If it
Yeah.
was simple, we'd all do it. But it's managing the terrain of our body, whether that's a blood sugar balancing, whether that's getting enough nutrients and minerals in us, whether that's sleeping sufficiently, whether that's managing our gut and our detox processes, such that now our body's starting to be more effective. And I want women to really hear that there's nothing wrong with you. There's just not a failing of something you did wrong. Your body is starting to shift. Your hormones and your physiology is actually shifting. And so now we need a new playbook for this season of our life. And that's where I think what you were alluding to of just layer on some hormone replacement, that's where that message is being missed that we need a whole new playbook. Yes, HRT can be part of that playbook if that's right for you, but that's not
Mhm.
the only chapter in this playbook.
Yes, absolutely. And like, I want all of us to be saying that as loudly as possible because the hormone therapy is very, very loud. And I understand all the reasons for why that is, right? There's advocacy that needed to happen. We saw some of the results of that in the United States with the black box warning being removed. It's important. It's an important fight. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that, like you just said, it is part of the playbook. It is not the playbook. But sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think it's a pendulum shift, right? When I came out of pharmacy school, that's when the WHI had just released their data. So that was a massive pendulum
Mhm.
shift. Now we're finally shifting that pendulum with really great voices in the space, but we're still living in a culture that wants a band-aid. And that HRT is this band-aid. And we are resistant to doing the hard work because it feels like one extra ball in the air and I don't have bandwidth for any more balls. And so if
Yeah.
I can just get some HRT on board, then my head might feel above water. And that might be true, such that then you can do the rest of that foundational work.
Absolutely. It's a conversation that I have with people a lot, right? It's really hard to start a resistance training routine when you are exhausted
100%.
constantly.
Yeah.
So, looking at hormone therapy to help get you back to a place, we can really start looking at, all right, what can I do differently now from what I was doing before? And I think there also is a narrative that we have to be careful around about getting back to. Yes.
It's interesting when you think of HRT, you can lump GLPs in there, you can lump any medications in there. The intent is to bring relief such that you can then work on foundations. Where it falls apart is when you don't do any foundations and you think that that is going to create this big C change that is not necessarily sustainable or that comes with side effects. Questions I like to think is, do I want to go back to my 20s? Hell no. I don't want to go back to
Mhm.
my 20s. But what women want in there is I want the cognition, I want the vitality, I want that freedom. That's what they want is I want the freedom of what that felt like with the world being my oyster and anything being possible. Okay, amazing. We can have that. We don't need it in a 20-year-old body. We don't need hormones of a 20-year-old, nor should we have them. But when you think of what is it that you truly want, it is I want to feel confident in myself. I want to feel free to choose whatever I want. I hear a lot of longevity, but I think when you dig in further about why is that so important is I don't want to end up like my mom who is in a nursing home. I don't want to end up like my aunt who I see with dementia. I don't want to end up like those things. And that finish line is creeping closer and closer to us. And so it's not so much I want to go back, but I want to hold on to what level of youth that I feel I have right now. And so if we can shift that conversation to great, how do we improve your health span? Because at the end of the day, that's what you want. How do we allow you the agency, the sovereignty, the mobility, the lack of frailty the body composition, which leads to confidence in ourselves. How do we allow you to have that in this time of life? And I'll offer, we have that with the wisdom. I worked with someone who said, working with you gave me the vitality of my 20s with the power that I have in my 40s. That's what women want.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that is a really important piece to highlight because I think one of the many reasons women who are younger don't want to look at menopause, perimenopause is because they're so afraid because all they're hearing currently is all the really hard shit. All of the body changes, all of those things. And while I do not deny that those things are real and exist, it also is this opportunity. I loved what you said. Like, I don't want to go back to when I was 20, but I do want that confidence. And actually, we can have it in ways that we couldn't when we were younger, right? Like, we have now this body of wisdom from all of the experiences that we have had that actually can allow us to be more free now
Yeah.
than we were then. Because we are asking, going back to earlier in the conversation, we are asking that question, what do I actually want? And that question really can change how we experience this time.
It is, what do we want? And we can have that discernment that it is in fact our choice, as opposed to what does society say I should want? What does my partner think I want? What do my parents think I should have? Because in your 20s, we're influenced by that so much. Never mind all the social media and what we should be wanting. Now we can stand in our own power and think in my 20s, I don't want to fight the way I had to climb the corporate ladder, to be successful. In fact, success doesn't mean that to me anymore in this season of life. To me, the real flex is, do I have time freedom? Do I have geographical freedom? Do I have health freedom? If those pieces are answered, that's a really rich life, no matter what the bank account is starting to say, or no matter what society sees as a standard for women in that age bracket.
Yes. And then just finally, you highlighted the idea of health span. And it's something I talk about a lot in my work as well. And I think you're really right that is what people actually want. It's health span. Right. So last year, before my dad passed away, a friend was with me when we were walking through his residence. And she said, how long do you think it's going to be before names like Tiffany and Jessica are on these doors? And that really made me think about how we want to experience aging. Because at the end of all of this conversation, it really comes down to that, right? We do not want to be frail, experiencing fractures, higher levels of dementia, all of those things that would have us in a place where Jessica and Tiffany and Amanda are now on the walls. So, what are the key things that you could leave listeners with that really help to support a good quality health span?
I'm laughing at the names on the wall because there is such a generational gap there.
Yeah, it's a big shift. And I really don't think Gen X will do aging the way the generations
No.
before. I don't think it's a possibility for us to just go quietly into that dark night. You know what I mean?
Because we're talking about it. Our moms didn't tell us anything. You were to ask them, how was your menopause? Meh, it was great. I didn't feel anything. I'm like, they didn't talk about it. It wasn't a thing. It was very shamed and very denied. Our generation now is being very loud and brash about it. So the subsequent generations will then be able to take that on. But to your question about health span, it is removing the friction that's keeping our body from being in optimum and vital health. So I think of things like, what are you putting in your mouth? What are you allowing into your body? And I think of it from a holistic perspective. But when we really get tangential, we have to be eating in an anti-inflammatory way. We need to be moving our body to create that strength. So much of our bone and muscle strength is built in our 20s and 30s when we don't even think about it. And now we're trying to make up for lost time. It is, how are we sleeping? Are we really the root is, are we prioritizing ourselves? Are we trying to fit ourselves into the crumbs of our life? Or are we actually putting ourselves in the top 3 of the most important things in our health, in our life? So I think of movement, I think of sleep, I think of what are you eating? And I think of how, and that goes into that metabolic piece of health. Then I think of where your nervous system. Are you stuck in on? Are you collapsed? Do you have regulation? And then the broader scope of it is, where is our mindset to all of this? If you think that I'm going to age really poorly and I'm going to end up frail, dementia, all those things, you're setting yourself behind the eight ball. But if you can then start to see some really vital women who are stepping into the light to allow us to see a new way forward, it doesn't have to be the way our moms and our grandmothers were. We now have role models. Now we have a tangential tool in our psyche that can then point to, okay, this is a possibility. Though what I've outlined seems like, holy moly, really? Like all the things, like I've got a job and kids and dog, like
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be all at once. We're not ripping off the Band-Aid. We're creating this out as a lifestyle in this new phase of our life. And so what worked in our 20s and 30s is not working now. We started this new playbook, but now it's, how do we build this out into a lifestyle? What are those 1% shifts every day that, as we start to do that, start to change the trajectory of where our health is going to be? A lot of women that come to me, feel behind. They feel like, I haven't been taking care of myself. I have been putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own. But now I'm at this inflection point where I have to start to choose. And what a beautiful place to be, as opposed to, I've now broken my hip and now I have to choose. Now you get to start this ahead of time and start to make those gradual shifts. There is not a shortage of information out there. There is no deficiency of knowledge. There is a deficiency of execution. There is a deficiency of choice, of feeling that you can do it. And sometimes that means you need to have support and you need a strategy that aligns with you and your lifestyle. But there is no shortcut to that. I really wish HRT was that magical answer. And sometimes for some people it is. But when it lands on a terrain that is supported, that your body is feeling regulated and safe to heal, no healing happens when you're stuck in on and your hair is on fire. Healing happens in this regulated side of your nervous system. And so when we can teach women to get there more often with more tools, and then layer on some of those physical health strategies to help their metabolism, things start to shift in really, really beautiful ways. I think I'm healthier now in my late 40s than I probably ever was in my 20s.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. And I want to just leave people with one really concrete, like specific example, because I think it's something that I experienced. And I think it's something that most people experience in one way or another. And I wish I had made a different decision at the time. And so let's do like an example of how to actually make a different choice. So it was when I was still in education and I was having a meeting. It was myself and three men. And the meeting started like this. Well, Lisa, you tell us what you want, and then we're going to tell you how everything actually works. And in that moment, my body spoke to me, but I didn't listen to it. I leaned into the be a good girl, operate within their structure, because if you don't, nothing will happen. Like all of the stories that we tell ourselves, right? To be specific. So my nervous system was activated. That and a number of other things led to a whole host of health issues that were the catalyst for why I ended up resigning from teaching. So imagine yourself in a moment like that. It doesn't have to be that exact, but when you have that moment of someone telling you that your value is not what you know it is, because that's why my nervous system came up, right? How do you help someone in that moment make a different decision that is going to be supportive of their long-term health, but also their identity?
I think it starts before that moment. I think it starts with unwinding the dysregulation that is happening from their metabolism, their nervous system, and their mindset. And so, if you're looking for one concrete thing, as trivial as it sounds, there's been so much evidence to support blood sugar stability. How does it pertain to cognition, anxiety, nervous system upregulation? My work is really helping women put down the stress fires, so putting down that cortisol activation in their system. You cannot do any of that when you are in metabolic dysregulation. So focusing on that first will allow you to have some cognition when you're in stressful situations like that. Then you can start to tackle those stories of being a good girl, people pleasing, unwinding that. But when you don't have your physical health on board from a metabolic perspective, it's going to be really hard to feel regulated. So focusing on blood sugar.
That's very helpful and reminds us that we are humans in a physical body and that looking after this physical body is really important. So we do have to, all our brain and chemistry, all of that is so important, but actually dropping in and feeling what's happening in the body and treating that so that we can have the full experience is so important. Farah, thank you so much for your wisdom today. This has been such a necessary conversation. Thank you so much for being here today. Well, thank you. And if Farah resonates with you, all of her contact information will be in the show notes. All of the ways that you can connect with her are there, so make sure you check that out. Thank you for hanging out with me on Transforming 45. If you laughed, nodded, or had an oh wow moment, hit follow and share it with your favorite midlife human. Find me on Instagram at @lboat and keep those transformations coming.
Electricast.